Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senves, Bayer, Engen, Nedbank, AFGRI, Grain SA, and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.
Welcome to Nation in Conversation from the Nampu Harvest Day. Well, the election is a week away. I think today, last week, we were still all wondering what is going to happen, how it will pan out. Will our party be successful? Will it not be successful? Will it strengthen the ruling party's hand? Will it weaken the ruling party's hand? Theo is an analyst, political analyst from the business school at the Northwest University. Theo, I'm going to start with you. The election was a week ago. We got the results last weekend. You were at the election floor at the IEC. That's also where you picked up a slight flu. But if you look back at the election, bar for the flu, if you look back, what stays with you?
Two things. The one is loyalty. Party loyalty for a large proportion of the South African electorate, those that went to vote. They stayed with their parties to a large measure. There was some movement away to other parties, but party loyalty is something that is very, very strongly fixed in the South African voter's mind. And the next thing is pragmatism. In other words, some form of moving to the middle, searching for who are we and where are we going. If you look at how the people voted, some more conservative to the right, some more to the left, the EFF. In my view, if you take the ANC and the DA as the two forces left of center and right of center, then the EFF becomes like a little opvangbakkie to the left and the Freedom Front like a opvangbakkie to the right. Ek weet nie wat 'n opvangbakkie in Engels is nie. And then there was very little traction for the weirdos, the showmen, the clowns, the BLF, and all of these purple cow parties, and the Front National being like the modern AVB. Very little traction. I counted at one point.
The EFF got more votes in Orania than the AWB Front National. Interesting.
Fascinating, but I think in the country as a whole, the EFF only succeeded in winning in 3 VDs. A VD is a voting district. It's not some venereal disease. It's just but it got 10.5+% votes. That means in every voting district they got a good sample of votes.
You talked about party loyalty underlying. Now I remember years ago when Nas Botha played for the Bulls and he went to Loftus, they said every team when they run on the field, they're 9-0 behind. Is there a number you'll put on that?
When we start an election, on day one, hour one, the ANC has got 30% of the vote. That's where they start. And it is, we worked out that number. That has to do with unemployment, it has to do with grants, several things. But the ANC starts with 30% of the vote, and then they move on from there. I do not subscribe very much to the statistics that we see nowadays saying that only half of the people that registered voted, wara, wara, wara. All over the world, you only count those votes that actually voted. All over the world, you get this big numbers, this discrepancies. Even when Trump was elected president, and you take all the Americans that could have voted, Trump is a minority president, but nobody cares about that. So let's count the votes that actually voted. What is concerning, however, is the stay-away vote. It seems to me what happens in South Africa is two constituencies use their votes differently. To the right, primarily whites, conservative whites, concerned whites, I'd rather call them concerned whites, use their votes actively to vote for another party, away, let's say, from the DA to the Freedom Front Plus. On the other side, to the left, black voters decided not to vote, to do a stay away, which was fairly large, except in one province, and that is Gauteng, where the ANC voters in 2016 penalized Jacob Zuma by staying away, 3 million of them. This time around, they came back, about 2 million of them.
2 million of the 3 million came.
I think Gauteng saved the bacon for the ANC in this election.
Right, I want to move on to Chris. Chris Burgess is the editor-in-chief of Landbou Weekblad, and his magazine turns 100 years. Chris, clearly you weren't there from the beginning, but still in the latter part of the years you were there, and I must congratulate you on your birthday. And I think every time as a non-farmer, if you page through the Landbou Weekblad, you realize how thorough it is, how detailed it is. And I think there's a reason why the magazine is 100 years old and going from strength to strength. So congratulations.
Thank
Chris,
you.
from an agriculture point of view, we've had the election, we have the 6th administration in place. Mr. Ramaphosa has said in his State of the Nation address, the second one will come, I think, the 20 or 22nd of June. What would you like to hear from an agriculture point? What's the areas that you believe can be and should be addressed?
Yeah, well, I think we all relieved that the elections is passed. Like Theo said, I mean, I think we sort of did hit a sweet spot. 57% is just enough for Mr. Ramaphosa to have a mandate, but also little enough to have sent a message. Look, you know, from an agricultural point of view, I think we know what needs to be done. You know, it's like the land question. You know, the models are there. You know, it's been, you know, we had them at Bella Bella last year. You know, 65 models. You know, across every discipline of agriculture. You know, you know, farmers, if you look at the entire economy, South African economy, farmers are most likely our best managers in the economy, just purely out of for the reason that they have to manage so many variables. So in terms of agriculture, I think it's pretty clear what we need to do. We need to remove the blockages that we have. And let's start with the elephant in the room. We start with land reform. So what Mr. Rolf Meyer is busy with, the public-private partnerships are going to be absolutely crucial in all of this. I think that a lot of work has been done, and Mr. Rolf Meyer will tell us more about it, but it seems as if a lot of work has been done behind the scenes for the public and the private sector to come together and to start working on the blockages. So in terms of land reform, we've got the models. We need sympathetic financing. That's what we need. You know, like Mr. Nick Safontaine says,
sympathetic finance.
Yes, we need soft loans. We need money. We need to get this. We need to make it possible for people to get involved in land reform without risking losing the family farm. And then there are other blockages. I mean, we need to develop export markets. We should never have lost our export market to China. That foot and mouth outbreak, we have all been waiting for it to happen for ages. When it did happen, the only good thing that came out of it was that we actually saw that we could work together, that the private and the public sector could work together. But what has happened is we've lost our export market for wool to China. China takes, I think, 70, 75, 80% of our wool. So the wool farmers have been on an incredibly good trajectory. That's been wiped out. The communal wool farmers in the former homelands, which has been one of our land reform flagship success stories. I mean, they've been cut off at the knees. This should never have happened. We should not be losing export markets. We should be actively developing and building export markets, not just for our commercial farmers, but for our communal farmers. Then there's the things like the platteland. I mean, we need to seriously look at how we rejuvenate the platteland. I mean, you drive through the Free State in the northwest. I mean, we are sitting in a crisis. We can't have these small towns with these huge townships on the fringes. It's just not sustainable. We have the drought still with us. I mean, the Northern Cape is in an absolute crisis. Banks are foreclosing on farmers as we speak. If we lose that agricultural infrastructure there, it's going to take us billions of rands to re-establish it. Water. We know what the issues are with water. Farmers need to be involved in managing our water resources. Climate change. we feel the effects of climate change. We know what the effects of climate change. You can ask any farmer in the Northwest. Regenerative agriculture, we need to start looking at how we make our farming more resilient. One last thing that I can just think of offhand is solar energy. There in the Northern Cape, where we've got where the drought is still absolutely acute, why aren't farmers being allowed to sell energy back into the grid? I mean, it's just a no-brainer. So I can keep you busy all afternoon with these things, but the fact of the matter is the only way that we're going to open up these blockages if we have sensible public-private partnerships. If we can get around a table, discuss these problems, come up with a sensible solution, and try and keep the politics for as much as possible out of the solution.
Right. Politics out of the solution, but unfortunately, land and agriculture is always a political environment. And I think it's right to say let's get the farmers and the role players working towards a solution. But unfortunately, land has got an emotional side to it. Agriculture has an emotional side to it. Rolf Meyer is a director of In Transformation Initiative. Rolf, I was not aware of the amount of work that's been done behind the scenes, and the strong message was delivered when we talked to people from the government this morning in earlier discussions, as well as last night at the press launch, to what extent there's discussions and interaction. And I first want to ask you about we've had the election now. Is there reason to be optimistic that we're in a different climate? And I'm not talking about climate change in terms of weather, I'm talking about political climate change. Is there a wind of change blowing?
Theo, I think it would have been easier in a month's time to answer that question, because we still have to see who's going to be in the cabinet. We still have to see what kind of rearrangement there is as far as the new administration is concerned. So I think it's unfair to make a clear judgment now. We can only talk about hope as far as the way forward is concerned. But let me touch on that for a moment. I think we have a president, and all that counts now, Theo is right, all that counts now, the election is over, we have a winner. And we have to look at the winner. The others can come back later in contesting what the government is doing. But for now, we have to look at what the winner is going to do, and that winner is Cyril Ramaphosa. And if one tests what he is and what he has promised, I think it's important to inform us about the question. I think in my mind, I've said it before, he's a modernist. And that means to me one thing, and that is that he's inclusive in his approach, and he's got a world view. And that differentiates him completely from his predecessor, completely. Which means that he is somebody who can understand not only what is necessary as far as the agricultural environment is concerned, but what is happening in the rest of the economy, what is happening in the rest of the world, like Chris was pointing out. So I think there is an advantage there, undoubtedly. But at the same time, he has made some commitments during the campaign that we should be able to rely on. My view is that I voted for him. To come back to him and to say to him, sir, I voted for you to do what you have promised. So fulfill your commitment. And he has committed himself very specifically to two things. One is to renew the country. Firstly, his own party. That he said very emphatically, publicly. And secondly, to renew the country in terms of the mistakes that have taken place over the last 10 years. I think the first thing Cyril Ramaphosa has to realize is that this was the last election that the ANC could take for granted. The last election. I'm absolutely certain in my mind about that. So it depends very much on what he's going to do over the next 5 years, if he wants to survive or makes the ANC survive. But he has made that commitment of renewal. And the second commitment that he has made, which I think is very important, is growth. I said it the other night, it's unthinkable a few years back, or very recently, that the ANC would go out to the campaign and say, vote for us for growth. That was the main line on the posters. And I think that's a very serious commitment. That is what we need as a country. So those two commitments are serious, and I think we have to take the president on that to go forward.
Just, I think sometimes we forget what this president cost South Africa. Let me take you, you can look at our GDP growth rate from the early 80s, and there's a close correlation between South Africa's growth rate and the world's growth rate. That correlation remained in place. That correlation broke down a year or two after the financial crisis 2010, 2011. And all of a sudden, the growth rate of the world picked up. Last year, the world's growth rate is about 3.7%. This year, about 3.3%. That gap between our growth rate and the world growth rate, that's always been correlated, results in the South African economy today being between 15 and 20% smaller than it should have been. 2 million people unemployed that should have had jobs. And you start to extrapolate that to grants, to tax, to VAT. We were like a boat going down the river but pulling our anchor. That's the difference between us and the rest of the world. So when you talk about getting us back to growth, it's not something magical. It's just going with the stream, going with the world stream. But Rolf, I want to stay with you for a minute. In terms of the discussions and the discussions that about the private-public growth initiative, can you give us some background on that, and where does agriculture fit in?
About a year ago or so, private sector, through some of the leaders, came out and said, how can we respond to the president's call, the Tumamina call of February last year? And private sector came out with this initiative to say, let us commit ourselves to a certain growth objective, goals, that will contribute towards turning around, like you say, turning around the need for growth of the GDP. To get, as somebody put it, to get us back at the #1 position on the continent. At the moment, we lie in the 3rd position. We used to be forever in the #1 position. Now we're at #3, talking about GDP. So the goal is growth. Growth in terms of creating opportunities, but also creating jobs, which is fundamentally the source of our problem when we look at the inequality situation in the country. So private sector came forward and said, okay, we can commit. If we look at it in terms of different sectors, we can commit X%, and we can create so many new jobs. But then government also has to respond in terms of what they are going to do with regard to the inhibitors, serious inhibitors that prevent the country from growing in those different sectors towards those goals. So it's a quid pro quo. It's a partnership that we're talking about. So we went to government. We had the first engagement with the president in August last year, and by January this year, we could present the president with a plan informing him about more than 20 sectors of the economy, all of the economy, making commitments towards very specifically growth plans for each sector. Now you ask, where is agriculture fitting into this? In our own mind, when we started to develop the plan in conjunction with the private sector, the automotive industry was sort of the #1 in mind because it has a track record of working with government, the manufacturing plans of the motor industry. And the second one was agriculture. Why? Because it has the growth potential. And it also has the potential to create jobs. So we could use agriculture as the second example. And we went to the president, John Purchase, who is here, presented on behalf of the agricultural sector, laid out the plan in terms of what can be achieved over the next 5 years, but also addressing the inhibitors that could prevent that from happening. So there's this fantastic, I would say fantastic because it's the first time in 25 years that I see this happening, where there's actually this match of ideas and the understanding that we have to do it together. I was talking last night to a government official who was here, and we spoke about this plan, the public-private growth initiative. And he said, this can work if the private sector drives it. And
If the private sector drives, but that's a mind shift.
Exactly, exactly.
That's a massive mind shift. Kunanani is the CEO of Fruit South Africa. From your perspective, if you were to say, when will agriculture be successful? Define success in the agriculture environment.
Thank you very much, Theo. Maybe I'll just take it a step back. First point that I want to make is that thank you very much for the Nation in Conversation and having me, because when I look around, I stand out.
Sorry, we are standing
in two ways. And that's how I saw the elections, basically. After getting the invitation to come here and participate, I basically went through the manifestos of the big three parties, plus the FF plus. I wouldn't have thought of going through their manifestos, but the election results basically led me to that. When looking at the manifestos of the DA, of the ANC, and the EFF and the FF plus, what came out very clear is that as South Africans, our aspirations and interests are very diverse. And unfortunately, they are going to the opposite direction. And I think it explains what Theo talked about. It might not be significant, but more votes that are going to the FF plus and more votes that are going to the EFF. And for me, that is a vacuum that is created. And we all know that vacuum doesn't exist in nature. Something will fill that in. And I think that's the extreme that's filling it. Therefore, I think as a nation, as South Africa, we need to basically have conversations, not politically charged, very sober-minded, looking forward to say, what is it that we want as South Africans? As black and white South Africans, as young and old South Africans, as men and women. I mean, we even have parties that were representing women in the elections, which was, a new to me. But that shows you that they feel that their interests and aspirations are not catered for. Therefore, I think we need to have this conversation, and that will help us come with, I think, a common vision for South Africa. Therefore, we'll be able to basically galvanize as a nation towards a common direction. I think we had that when the first democratic president was leading us. I think we were galvanized as a nation, but I don't think it was enough or it was rooted. Therefore, I think we need to take a step back, and I think President Ramaphosa, with his consultative and I think accommodating leadership, he can be able to do that. Basically to say, as South Africans, where do we want to go? And that for me, it's basically looking at one of the key issues, which is the system that we inherited after '94 was basically based on exclusion of the majority Africans. Then what I see we have been trying to do the past 25 years was to patch it, try to accommodate the majority, but we see it's falling apart because it was not geared towards doing that. Therefore, the question is, how then do we rebuild this system without breaking it, because we need to have a system in place. But then how do we rebuild it going forward to accommodate the majority so that the economy is structured in such a way that it have room for the majority to meaningfully participate? Because if we don't do that, we'll see the extremes, I think, growing and growing. Therefore, that also applies to the agriculture sector. For me, it's how do we build an agriculture sector that is inclusive, representative, young people, old people, women, men, black and white, all participating meaningfully in that agricultural sector. And I believe that is possible. We can do that. But I think we need to basically forgo our narrow, selfish interests and look at what is good for South Africa. And I would think those who are not committed to build, they shouldn't be here. But otherwise, we need to say, we need to build our country. It's our generation that needs to do it. Because if we don't do it, the next generations are going to suffer the consequences. I mean, it's going to be worse. The extreme, I think, is going to grow worse if we don't sit and say, as South Africans, let's have a common vision, let's have a common basically glue us as a nation.
I want to take a number of points, but first, yes, Chris.
Now, I just wanted to say I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. Just an example that I wanted to mention was earlier, late last year, the community of Kenton-on-Sea, at the Bushman's River, came together. And it was an initiative driven by a few of the business people, black and white business people in the area, the mayor, some of the farmers, some of the entrepreneurs, and they got the entire community together one day. The agricultural community, the black entrepreneurs out of the township, the mayor, tourist operators, and they got everyone together and said, what do we have in our community that we can leverage to build an inclusive economy? What are those things that already exist that we can use practically to move to move the whole social exercise forward? And what is the social exercise? Creating jobs, creating a more inclusive economy. And that was the first time that I saw that it was being done at a practical level, because I think theoretically we agree. I mean, you look at agriculture, we know it needs to become more inclusive, but how do you go about it? And that's the point I was trying to make. We need to start identifying those things that we can change. You know what I mean? Things like those export markets. Like we shouldn't have a foot and mouth outbreak, because suddenly those communal wool farmers in the Transkei are back to square one, and those are the practical conversations we should be having every day in every part of this country.
Theo, I want to take a point that Kunanane made about a common vision. That was clearly defined, the need for that in what's that document, the
NDP.
That old document that seemed to have got lost somewhere.
National Development.
That at some point it was the document, then it got less and less, and all of a sudden it was filed. It seems that somebody is blowing the dust from it again. But having said that, what is the chances of that kind of social cohesion, of that active citizenry? It talks about common goal, common vision. What's the chance under the new administration of that kind of thought process getting some air again?
Well, prior to 1994, Frederik van Zyl-Slabbert called South Africa an exercise in exclusive intolerance. That was a very academic name for apartheid. When Mandela came, he said, well, what we now have is inclusive tolerance. In the Zuma years, we got inclusive intolerance. So we're together now, but we're pulling in different directions. And I think the contribution of Cyril Ramaphosa is to take us back to that phase where we have inclusive tolerance. In other words, it is the precondition for looking in the same direction. We don't have to follow every rule. We don't have to be all in the same boat, but at least if the boats or the fleet go in the same direction. I think that's the best a nation can do. And I think that if there's one contribution that he can make, and now I want to add on to what Rolf said, to do that, and Rolf, you'll remember, he was very explicit about these things at the Atterbury meeting, where he said, for the first time I heard him say, what is my interpretation of Nasrec? Not what we heard, expropriation without compensation, free higher education, all of those things dominated Nasrec and his small little victory. No, he said cleaning up the ANC. Then almost a paradox, keeping the ANC together, cleaning up the country, and he also referred to capacitating the state, which is the last chapter of that old document that you almost forgot about. And capacitating the state means looking at education in all its aspects. And I think in agriculture, for me, if we can link training and education to land reform, we've got a sweet spot, because those two things, and of course financing the whole thing, but those two things go hand in hand, because very often it's through the training and the education dimension that you develop over time a common vision, but it takes time. I don't think we should expect things to happen within a year or two. It takes time, but at least if the mindset is looking in the same direction, I think we've got something to work on.
Rolf, I want to go back to you and link to what Chris was saying. Funding remains a key element in agriculture. And Chris was talking about soft loans, and incidentally, I think one needs to appreciate that the modern or South Africa's current commercial farming base had periods of soft loans in the last 100-odd years on a number of occasions. So it's not something foreign to agriculture to be assisted by funding. But Rolf, I would like to talk a bit about this idea of a agriculture developmental agency. What is the idea? Where does it fit in? And is it gaining traction?
Yeah, I think the idea originated from the from the memory of those that spoke about the Landboukredieteraad. And many of you here might recall that, which was something, an institution of the state that helped farmers, especially young new farmers, to bring them to the capability of starting commercial farming. And that went lost, that function. And I think we, after analyzing the situation from all ends, there was a realization that we need something of the same. To look after the funding requirements for especially emerging farmers, newcomers, but also to help them with the necessary skill base to actually become operational commercial farmers. The state tried this, but I don't think it works. I don't want to elaborate too much on that. There are bad examples, unfortunately, within that scope. So what we are looking at the moment, and this is still work in progress, is to establish a PPP, public-private partnership between the different contributors in the agricultural sector from the private side and the state to establish this agricultural development agency, which would have those two functions of funding and transfer of skills. And I think there's a body of thinking, we can say now, within the whole of the agricultural business environment, as well as very senior prominent farmers in the country, and also government departments, including the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, who've said that we would like to work together to bring about this institution. In Transformation Initiative fulfills a facilitating role in this regard. One of our associates, Malcolm Ferguson, has done a lot of consultation work in this regard. And I think we're moving forward with the support of very prominent individuals within the agricultural sector, but also on the government side. And hopefully we can move forward within the next months to make this thing a reality. I think it's absolutely necessary, because wherever we go around the country, there's this aspiration by young people from across the board who would like to say, we would like to become farmers. But the opportunities are not there, and we don't know how. And we don't have the necessary funding. So I think this can create a new wave. I'm serious about this. It can create a new wave of growing the agricultural sector, because the potential is there. It's a question of how do we expand the production capacity and seek new markets.
Kunanani, let's say we have the discussion in 5 years' time, and you sit here again, and I ask you, what did we do right? How did we get here? What would you say? How did we get here?
Thanks very much. I think one key issue that we need to deal with is the issue of policy uncertainty. We need to get the issue of, for example, the land resolved, because I think that's holding us back. Therefore, we get that sorted, and then we can be able to produce, get access to finance so that production can increase. Because the way I see it is that the expertise in agriculture is there. I mean, whether it's from the commercial farmers who are very willing to work with emerging farmers. But then to do that, you need to have land and ownership of land with a title deed. For example, I mean, the land reform currently, you have farmers who are put on land that is leased. I mean, that is not...
You don't have access to the financial system.
No, you don't. And how then do you plan long term? And how do you get people to come and invest in that kind of an asset? Therefore, if we can get that sorted, I think we'll be able then to produce and then also then deal with the issues of markets.
Access to markets.
Access to markets, better access for those markets that we have, retain the markets that we have. The issue that Chris talked about, we cannot afford to lose any market. Therefore, the markets that we have, we must make sure that we retain them. And to be able to retain them, it means that you need capacity within the state to be able to proactively, I mean, this morning, I like the discussion about this squad, like this market target squad, where if there's an issue in whichever market, you go in there, within weeks, it's sorted. I mean, from the fruit industry, for example, we lost the Thailand market. It took us 8 years to go back into that market. Therefore, we can't afford to lose markets. But the issue is that if you have a state that doesn't have the capacity to be able to deal with those issues, even before they even happen, then you have a problem. Therefore, those are the building blocks that we need to put in place. Agencies that are coming not basically to steal from the government. I mean, we have a lot of, for example, land reform projects which have strategic partners that are just milking government. That cannot be. And I think if we have a common vision as South Africans to build South Africa, to build the agricultural sector, therefore I think the conscience of the people who are rendering those services must tell them that you can't charge twice the price of the thing that you need to charge for a certain amount of money, because basically you're stealing from yourself. Therefore, if we have those kind of systems in place, and also I think us as the public, we need to make our government accountable. I think for some reason the past 9 years, it seems like we were under some spell or something, because we were all so quiet. I mean, the looting and everything was happening.
At the end that we really,
only at the end, it's like we wake up.
It actually took Judge Mogoeng one night on TV to explain to South Africans what a constitutional democracy is.
Exactly, but we were all here. And I mean, you think of it like, what happened? Therefore, I don't think we can afford that kind of slumber anymore. We need, I think, to put even President Cyril and the whole cabinet that is going to account, and it's our responsibility and our duty. And I think doing all those things in 5 years, we'll see a prosperous, inclusive agricultural sector, and South Africa as a whole.
I want to come to you. Kumanani started the discussion by saying we need the land issue resolved one way or the other. My big concern with the land issue is the minute you start to mess with the value, the underlying value of the system will collapse. So whatever you do, land, if that is land ownership, patent rights, auditor rights, whatever it is, it needs, the value needs to be structured in a way that it is there. It is never a question of value. The land issue disappeared in the noise of the election. What is your take on it?
Yes, prior to the election, everybody thought land is going to be the big issue. It wasn't. But land is not away. It's not gone. It is something that was high on the agenda 25 years ago. Over time, it moved, especially if you look at the budgets every year in real terms. You could see government budgets for land reforms actually declining in real terms, which meant the urgency for land wasn't there. They did it, but it wasn't that urgent. The urgency is back. It was not an election issue as such, but it is not gone, and it is there. And it's one thing that we will have to resolve in some way or another. I think it will take longer. I think even if we look at the committee that the President appointed, the specialized committee to advise him, at one point I differed very strongly with my co-commentator Max de Pre for leaking the document, saying there's a major report and a minor report or something like that. It seems to me those things are sorted out. If the cabinet is appointed, if there comes some stability in government and they look at the merit of what I think that specialized committee will provide them with, I think there's a plan. Personally, I think the constitution will get changed, but it may be a very cosmetic change because it has to fulfill a certain political requirement. But I think land reform will take much longer, and we'll have to do it in a very comprehensive way so as not to lose the confidence in the system, because you're right, the underlying value of land is there, but it is also something that we cannot ignore, and we cannot play ostrich politics by putting our heads in the sand. Apparently ostriches don't do that, but anyway, it's a metaphor. We'll have to sort it out. What I like in all these meetings that I've attended is the goodwill among the farming community and farm leaders to actively participate in that. And we've got the same problem in the business world. And I think with Ramaphosa, the reason why I have confidence in his presidency, he changed a paradigm ever so slightly. When I facilitate, and Rolf will know everything about that, when I facilitate between communities and business people, what you get around the table is the communities regard the business people as the difficult guys, as the guys with money, as the enemy. Now you want to work with the enemy, both sides must change. It's not only for one side to change. I think what Cyril Ramaphosa brought to the table, which Jacob Zuma could never do, was to explain these guys cannot be the enemy. We're part of one country. Let's change our mindset about how these things work, and then we can jointly work out. I'm not sure there's a ready answer for land reform. I think it's a long term, but the solution sits in a joint mindset about where we must go.
Yeah, for every complicated problem, there's a simple solution that doesn't work. That's, I think, with land. Just in terms of land, is John Purchase around? I see John is not here, but AgBiz has what I believe is probably the nicest, concise, graphically rich document about the land debate, where it is, where the different legislation fits in, where the process is. And I think this Francois is regtig from AgBiz side. It's an 8-page document. It's nice and colorful, but if you want to know what the legalities is, what's in the expropriation bill, what the conditions are, what the processes is, what kind of votes is required at what point. If you want a quick 8-page, illustrative, easy, concise document on the land reform process, it's on AgBiz website, and it is under the tab, transformation tab. It's 8 pages. It's really a proper nice document. I think, Francois, you can congratulate AgBiz and John on that document. It's a great document.
And Wandile.
And Wandile. I think Wandile, yeah, there was 3 authors. I assume but Wandile was part of that. So it is a great document. Now, we're about 2/3 along the way. At this point, is there any questions? If there's a question, I'm going to take 2 or 3 questions, and then please say who the question is addressed to, who you are and who the question is addressed to. So let's start with, there's a question. Dieter, there's a boom here. Just yes, sir.
Thank you so much, ladies, gentlemen. I do not have a real question, but I have something to say. But I'm afraid my knowledge of the British language won't allow me to say in English what I want to say. Am I allowed to say it in my own language? Yes. I'm very sure here are many interpreters to help me along the way. Can I go in?
Yes, yes.
Baie dankie. Meneer Meyer, jy weet, ek ken jou al baie lank al. Jy was die klein minister van polisie toe ek ook gedien het in die polisie. En Jy was 'n groot ondersteuner van die nasionale party, so ook ek. Nou, ek wil saamstem met meneer Theo Venter dat daar gaan 'n wysiging aan die grondwet kom wat betref grondhervorming. Dit is maar altyd 'n emosionele kwestie. Maar wat my blymoedig stem is die feit dat niemand kan voorspel hoe dit gaan gebeur nie, maar wat ek wel kan sê, en hier's baie boere wat dit seker altyd in gedagte het, en dit is dat dit gaan nie gebeur soos my nasionale party en u nasionale party gedoen het so onlangs as in 1985 om boere op te laai van hulle plase af en iewers te gaan damp, het sy dit tuisland, daar is nie meer tuislande nie. So, die demokratiese regering van vandag, weet ek, sal dit nie waag nie, en dit is 'n gerusstelling, dat hulle gaan nie boere behandel soos my nasionale party en u nasionale party boere destyds behandel het nie. U oud kollega, Dr. Leon Wessels, ek en hy het altyd 'n argument omtrent dit. Hy wil sê dit is, daai keer is 'n nasionale party van die 50s, maar dit was die nasionale party waarin u gedien het, en meneer Wessels, en wat ek so hard ondersteun het, net soos u. So ek sê vir u baie dankie.
Baie dankie. Baie dankie. 'n vraag hierso.
Yeah. My name's Malcolm Ferguson. I want to ask a question of Theo Venter. Up until the last election, it was clearly my impression that the mobile voters in South Africa, i.e. the voters who move between parties, were essentially black. That white voters had chosen a place in our body politic and they were sticking. Well, we've seen in this election that that has changed. But something that I found quite remarkable after the election, in talking to people, whites by the way, in Johannesburg, was the large number of whites in the leafy northern suburbs of Johannesburg who had voted for President Ramaphosa. And I asked people why. And the answer was very simple. Do we vote for hope, or do we vote for history? History tells us why we shouldn't vote as whites for the ANC. Hope tells us why we should. And that was something that I found remarkable, because if one looks at the numbers, Theo, the story is not only about a shift by white voters to the Vryheidsfront, it's also about a shift by white voters to the ANC. And that, I think, is a heartening development for a simple reason. In Canada, since the early 1900s, a minority community, the French, as the French vote, so goes the government of Canada. There hasn't been a single occasion since the early 1900s where there's been a change of government in Canada where the French in a majority haven't voted for that change. And when you have mobile voters and you're a minority, you become very important when you move between major political parties. That's a comment I'm making, and I'd like a response, please.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's one more there, the gentleman in the blue bulls, no it's not, it's nearly, but yeah.
Hello, I'm Peggy Spear. I would like to direct my question to Mr. Mayor. We have the land bank, which is more than 100 years of age. And why can we not take the land bank and transform it to the Agricultural Development Agency? Why is it that when we have a problem, we form a new organization which will go through crawling and teething problems and maybe stealing money, and then we again wonder what was happening? Can we not take the land bank, hold it with its hind legs and shake it so that we add on its financial mandate, the developmental mandate?
Thank you. I think there's a question first for you, Theo. I saw, and I didn't verify the numbers, so I might be wrong, but on social media, somebody tabulated the numbers and showed that if you add the ANC's votes throughout the country on the national ballot and you add the ANC votes on the provincial ballot, the difference is 642,000. Now, I'm not sure if that is correct. I didn't check that. I just saw the numbers added up, and that is the vote you're talking about. People that voted provincially for Party X, that was both in Gauteng, Mpumalanga, KwaZulu-Natal, they voted Party X, provincial, and for Cyril, national. Theo, your view.
Thank you. And thanks, Commissioner Smallman, that you did not ask me any questions. But it's, no, the mobile voter, in other words, the voter that moves around. If you look at the poll, then the ANC could not, in 25 years, move its support among white voters beyond 2%, between 1% and 2%. That line is absolutely flat, while the line among black voters is oscillating. But I think in this election we had 3 or 4 types of votes. We had, well, you reminded me of Steve Hofmeyer in his advert for the Freedom Front Plus, which said, we're not voting for a better past, we're voting for a better future, which was a funny kind of advert. Yeah. But the, a portion of white voters left the DA for the Freedom Front Plus. I'm not sure whether that vote is a knee-jerk reaction or it's a trend. We just don't know. It's a week. We will have to dig deeper into that. My gut feeling is this year, with the BLF and all the other issues and the fuel prices and electricity, you can list about 10 things which would have caused a gatvol factor, and the Freedom Front is a nice little place to put your gatvulness in. It may not be the same in the next election. There's also a significant number of conservative, not right-wing, just conservative English voters that voted for the Freedom Front Plus. We tend to forget about that little portion that also went there. Some of them called me from Sandton and said, I'm going to do this, so I know they're there. And then, of course, there is, let's call it the Peter Bruce vote, that said, I'm going to vote for Cyril. I'm not an ANC supporter, but we need to vote for you to give you a mandate. The difficulty with the Cyril vote for the non-ANC members, of course, was summed up very nicely by my colleague Raymond Parsons, which had his birthday just before the election. And he said, well, are you going to vote for the jockey or the horse? Now, in South Africa, you can't divide the jockey and the horse. They're one little vehicle. In America, you can do that. But I do think that that mobile vote is more diverse. And there is definitely, in the business community and in people that voted for Hope, would have voted for the ANC. And you're right with your analysis. It's not only for the ANC that there was a split vote. Now, a split vote is a sign of a sophisticated vote. In other words, you go into that little cubicle and you make up your mind and you vote. We call that sophistication. There's a very definite sophistication among the black vote. There was a sophistication among the white vote. We see the difference also with the EFF. We can see people voted for the EFF nationally but not provincially. There was a vote in terms of the DA where we saw people voted DA nationally but Freedom Front provincially. So the split vote, it's not extensive, but it was there. But to answer your question shortly, yeah, there is definitely that kind of vote that went for the ANC, but I'm scared to call that a trend. I think this election, in many ways, was a very important election. In my view, the most important part of it, it's a generational election. It's 25 years into the new dispensation, and I want to agree with Rolf that the history of liberation movements, or then political parties that caused a transition of a system, usually lasts one generation. That's their honeymoon. They can do anything and they will be forgiven in that one generation. And then that's typically 25 years. And then it changes. If you look at the politics in Namibia, although it's still SWAPO, the current leader of SWAPO was previously never thought, everybody thought forever SWAPO will have a leader with a Wambu background. Currently it is not that, it has changed. Zambia shows us. The only difference, of course, being Zimbabwe, but I don't think we should use Zimbabwe for any examples.
Right, thank you. The question about the land bank, in terms of your view on the Agriculture Development Agency and the gentleman's comment about, and I must perhaps just put my view on the table. If you look at the Land Bank's results the last 3 or 4 years, they present the results at the JSE, bankers are there, they analyze them carefully, they talk about cost to income ratio, bad debt write-off, margins. They run like a commercial bank. They've got access. When 2 years ago, when no SOE had access to the capital market, the Land Bank's debt was oversubscribed. When they wanted R1 billion, they got R3 billion. So what is the difference, and why is this entity needed as opposed to the Land Bank?
Can I respond to the general first? You made a comment that I think is spot on. And all I can say is I'm happy to say today that at least we recognize the mistakes and the stupidity of the past and corrected that through what we did in the 1990s.
Thank you so much, because anyone else of my age still denies it.
Thank you for reminding us of those stupidities.
Perhaps just take a point on that. I was at the Atterbury meeting that we referred to, and at some point in that meeting, and I didn't know that, Cyril and his family was loaded on a lorry one day, and Mr. Steenekamp, he even said the name, Mr. Steenekamp got the farm, and they got taken to Venda. The whole grouping got dumped in Venda. And Mr. Steenkamp got the farm. So it happened in different spheres. But
yes, we were even instructed to stop the Rand Daily Mail for publishing those incidents.
yeah. Yes. We've come a long way. Yes, sir.
Becky, sorry, the camera is in between. I can't respond on behalf of the Land Bank because I'm not here with a mandate from them. The question to me would be, as you are putting it, why have they not taken up the opportunity? And probably the explanation is that the Land Bank was never envisaged to be that kind of vehicle. It was not like that in the past, and it's not like that now. In other words, a body or an institution that can take care of the need and the requirement in between. When I was referring to the Landboukredietraad, and you know Afrikaans, so you know what that meaning is. I guess it's Land Credit Board it was called. When that existed in the previous era, it was next to and parallel to the Land Bank. In other words, the Land Bank never fulfilled the role that we're talking about now. So this vehicle that we're talking about, the Agricultural Development Agency, is something that fills a vacuum that's not being covered at all. If the Land Bank wants to change its mandate, I suppose they can go to the government to ask for that. But so far they haven't done it. It can only happen that way. And there are talks that they aspire to become have more of a development role and purpose. Whether that's going to materialize, I don't know. But they're definitely not there. And as long as the vacuum exists, we have to help the people that are in need.
I think just on the Land Bank, although I think they're a well-run SOE, if one can call it that, they still rely on funding from the private sector. So they need to take the same risk return elements into context than any other commercial bank. And I think what one needs here is some risk return change, some higher risk appetite. And I think that is what will take the Land Bank's mandate is more of a commercial bank, yes, yeah, bad debt, risk return mandate than a developmental, higher risk, lower return mandate. But that's a very personal view. I'm not sure if it carries any water. Further questions? Yes, sir. I'm going to take 3 more questions.
Baie dankie.
And then I'm going to ask everybody for a closing comment. So Yes.
Van der Merwe van Alberton, dis nie vir spesifieke een nie, maar net, hoe kry ons die jong mense terug, kom ons sê eers in die politiek, om te gaan stem, maar terug by die landbou?
Baie dankie. Thank you very much. Another question? Is there any other questions? All right, there's a question there and there. So let's take the question and then right at the back.
Hi, it's Etienne Skuman. We've seen recently President Trump has announced tariffs to primarily protect inland production or domestic production. A question maybe for Rolf and Theo, is that something that's being addressed with this PPGI initiative? And we certainly know it can help in our mining and minerals environment, and how can that help us in the agriculture sector as well? Thank you.
Thank you. And then there, right at the back. So the question is, how do we get young people actively involved politics, but actually in agriculture, protection of certain industries? I think last night somebody used the word infant industry and infant farmers. How do we actually give them a bit of leeway? And then at the back.
It's Tom van Rooyen from Potchefstroom. Maybe just a comment, there's no one on the panel here from the government, but I think the first important thing is to look after your commercial farmers and your upcoming farmers in the same way. To make the upcoming farmers competitive, and upcoming farmer is competing globally the day he starts farming. So we commercial farmers are struggling with that. So how difficult must it be for an upcoming farmer? And if you leave the commercial sector unattended to the upcoming farmers sector, I think is going to be even more in trouble. So yeah, I think they must have a balanced look at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's start off, Theo.
With the young people.
Yeah.
Young, maybe I should go to the word paradigm again. When we grew up, and I'm not that old, I may look older, but I grew up with Afrikaans radio, the Huisgenoot, and if we wanted to read something, it was the Reader's Digest. That's probably. We secretly read the Scope as well. but my mother and listened to LM radio. Those two things were basically prohibited, but we did it. Then when I went to university, I got exposed to television, and I was about in my 40s when I got exposed to the internet. And while swine flu touched South Africa, my kids taught me Facebook. That's how my life progressed. Young people today are so linked into everything that I think conventional politics is not a very interesting place for them to be. They can have immediate gratification through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever. They can immediately have a discussion going on. So we must understand where the so-called millennials, where they are and where we are. It's different. And then you present them with, you call Cyril a modernist, then you present them with a traditionalist, Mr. Zuma, then everybody loses confidence in the system. Where is this man with so many wives and doing such funny things? Where is he coming from? So there's a disconnect between the system and the young people, and I think with a more modern political system, we may change that naturally over time. But I must tell you, it's a global phenomenon that young people do not participate in politics. What they do participate in, what we see in France, in England, in other places, these Yellow Brigade guys almost taking France, getting France to stop. In America, when they start doing things against Mr. Trump, which is the second question, it's a different world, and I'm not sure we truly understand how to get young people involved in this. I'm not exactly sure we understand how to get them and we must ask them somehow to do it. And I'm exposed to young people at the university day in and day out, and it's a good thing that you must retire at some point. Because there comes a point where you just don't know how these things are working. How to get them involved in farming, I'm not going to answer that.
Chris, I'm going to put that question to you. How do we get them involved in farming? But and also perhaps about how do we protect the emerging farmer, both you and Rolf, but clearly you're the youngest person on this panel, by a long shot. How did you get involved in agriculture, and what made it interesting? Because there might be part of the answer of how do we make agriculture attractive to young people.
Okay, for me, it's part of a journey. I grew up in a rural area in a village, therefore agriculture was just part of life. Every summer you grow maize and all those kind of things. I even had my stint in taking care of goats as I was growing up. But when I went to university, I wanted to be a chemical engineer, chemical engineer. But then I couldn't make it into chemistry. I liked mixing things, but then my second choice was agriculture, and I'm glad I fell into that second choice because I really love the agriculture space because you deal with practical issues and then you can also help people, like directly. You see, I mean the crop sciences, you plant something, you see it growing, and then you reap the harvest, and you see how it impacts on people. Bringing in young people, I think it's an issue that maybe the older people might not have ideas in terms of how to do that because they are not from that generation, their thinking is not like that. And therefore, basically, we need to bring in the young people and ask them, how can we reach you? What is it that excites you? Because I think the perception that is there in terms of agriculture is this dirty people who are with, if you're Africans, with shorts and all the, and that is not how agriculture is.
There's a lot more to it.
And today it's even more exciting because of, for example, the fourth industrial revolution. We need more agriculturalists who can develop drones, who can develop all this technology, sitting in there, whatever, pressing, and then the irrigation is done, spraying and all those kind of things. But I think it's just how are we communicating that message with the young people, and it cannot be the older people who design that message because they don't speak that language.
The older people, the young people needs to, one of the sponsors here is Bayer. And if anybody wants to know about the science of agriculture, go to the Bayer stand and ask them to take you through the stand. And go and look at through the microscopes and go and see if you can find the different stuff that they're working on. And then go and map out the yield difference. A farmer makes 40 decisions in a year. Each one of them has an impact, and they show that. So I'm saying it because they're one of our sponsors, but that tells you the science of agriculture and how it is. Now, I'm going to ask, we run out of time, I'm going to ask each of you the exact same question, and I asked it last year at some point. Let's, for argument's sake, say we're in this position and your phone rings and it's the president to say, look, I need to prioritize 3 or 4 things, and I'm going to put the 3 of you on agriculture, and for you I'm going to put on confidence in general, to build confidence. So I'm going to ask you, Theo, about confidence, and the rest of you about what should the priorities be in terms of agriculture if the president were to ask you that question. So Theo, let's start with you, not agriculture, in terms of building confidence amongst us, the guy that voted for the afvalwater, or what you call it, or the Sandton guy that voted for him. What can he do to bring them together?
Well, I think the first thing was mentioned already. Provide us with some policy certainty. If you declare a policy, follow your policy. The second thing, and he's already doing the second thing, is give us good speeches. Give us speeches as a statesman. I mean, for 9 years, I suffered through the State of the Nation address by Jacob Zuma, which was a cut and paste exercise with no coherency. Suddenly, we already had 1 or 2 good ones. Continue on that thing. And your role as a statesman, is beyond your role as a politician, and he understands that extremely well. I could see that he can distinguish between these roles. We cannot yet distinguish, because sometimes when he speaks to his political audience, we pull it through as if now the president. And sometimes when he's president, continue doing that, give us the confidence and provide us at least. The role of a president in South Africa in future is to beat the drum in terms of a positive inclination towards growth, towards the economy. He said that also at Atterbury, when this one guy said to him, what is your priority number one? He said, get the economy going. Yeah. And I would encourage him to do those things. That's his role. He can encourage, other people can follow.
Chris?
Yeah, you know, let me put it to you this way. The way I see it is that the state's role is there to create an enabling environment. Okay, so they should get the big things right: the policy, the intergovernment exchange to open up markets, and all the rest of it. But if you look at the example, the Landbou Kredietraad has been mentioned often in the conversation today. The reason why that worked is because it got decentralized down to district level. So people, so if you want land reform to work, and we've heard that it's a complex problem, and the reason why it's complex is because it differs from district to district. So the way you resolve land reform in a stock farming district will be different to how you resolve it in a citrus farming area. So if you want land reform to work, devolve it down to the level where people can forge their own destiny, because that is what we've seen with land reform projects that work. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, and that's what we've had until now. We've had bureaucrats sitting in the Department of Land Reform having a top-down structure saying, this is the way that we're going to do land reform. We're going to establish commercial black farmers. Well, you might want to commercial black farmers in one spot, but in other spots you might want communal wool farmers, or you want people in the communal areas to have a different setup to citrus farmers in the Cat River where they need property rights. So my advice would be devolve that sort of decision making down to district level and let ordinary South Africans forge their own future. Let the people that understand agriculture drive the process, not politicians.
Rolf?
Can I first?
You're perhaps the only guy that's got a chance of getting the call.
What kind of call? Can I? The answer is no, by the way. Can I just deviate for a moment from your question and say, less than 2 years ago, prior to December 2017, Chris and I were together in the studios of Brand Republic in Pretoria. You might not recall.
I do recall that.
And we had a conversation on the sideline, not in front of the camera, and in which both of us were so despondent about the situation in the country that we almost wanted to give up. And now I think we're sitting here with hope. That's a big change, a huge, huge change. As far as the way forward is concerned, I would like to use an anecdote to get my point across. In June of 1992, before the birth of some of you, we had a major problem in the country. We were actually at the brink of collapse with regard to the negotiating process. We had Boipatong, General, you will recall. Boipatong massacre happened, as a result of which the ANC under Mandela called off all further talks. Negotiations were completely stopped by Mandela. And I will never forget that moment. But what it forced us to do from the very next day was that our president, who was the leading negotiator for the ANC, and I had to pick up the pieces. We got together with the mandates of our leaders, our principals, And we got together, and for the next 3 months, we were just sitting down and talking without stop, which led to a new vision together for the country. And that vision became known as the Record of Understanding. And you can Google it, you can find it. I was telling another audience the other day that half of that document is actually crap. It has no meaning of any significance. But half of it was speaking about the future of this country and what we want jointly together for the future. And that was the turning moment. That was the real moment of settlement for the future, because we agreed what we wanted from the future instead of what we want to protect from the past. And I want to use that anecdote to say I think this is a moment where we have to look at ourselves as a country and say, how are we going to get out of this? There's a thing looming over us, this inequality gap in the country. If you don't believe me, go and read the latest Time magazine, which has it on its front page. If we can't fix this, not Cyril Ramaphosa or the ANC or the EFF is going to save us, let alone Freedom Front Plus. But we can jointly do it. If we find a joint action in terms of a joint agenda, we can fix it. And that is where I think agriculture can play a role, because we can, within this sector, we can find the joint ingredients. Gloria, who's sitting there, Gloria Sarobi, has made an example of what she's doing, exactly by doing this. A joint agenda between South Africans at large, but essentially between private sector and government. So my answer to the question about trade restrictions, trade restrictions is never going to work. At some point, Trump is going to pay a price for that. But the model that we're working on, this PPGI, Public-Private Growth Initiative, is not based on China or the US. It's actually based on a Japanese model, because the person who invented the idea is Johan van Zyl, who's the chief executive for Toyota in Europe and Africa and the Middle East. And he said the Japanese don't use long papers to make proposals and write concept notes and what. They use one diagram to say what they want to do, and then it works. And I think we can follow that model. If we can bring together private sector and government on this basis of a one-pager with a joint agenda and say, how do we create jobs? How do we uplift the poor? Then we can fix the country within 5 years.
I'm going to, two questions that we didn't really touch. The question at the back, should there be a different system or a different assistance? And I'm going to ask you, Chris, perhaps your comment, for big commercial farmers and for establishing farmers. Should there be a different way of looking at them?
Well, I mean, it all comes back to what Rolf is saying. I mean, it's a shared vision. What is the shared vision? The shared vision is getting more wool into China. If you are a communal farmer, or you Julian Southey in the crew, you want to get your wool into China, and the rising tide raises all ships. And that's what Tom was referring to. If the commercial farmer is not making it, you're going to struggle to keep your smaller farmer. And I'm not talking about just black farmers. I'm talking about white family farmers. So that rising tide that we hope Mr. Rolf Meyer's initiative is going to unlock, where the cake grows for everyone. Everyone does better if we get more wool into China. The communal guy does better. The commercial guy gets better. We pay more tax. Everything runs better. And it's those blockages in our economy that we desperately need to start identifying and unlocking. And the concern that I have is that we all hope that Cyril Ramaphosa is going to provide somehow miraculously the solution. If Mr. Ramaphosa can just allow ordinary South Africans to make an input, because Mrs. Gloria Sarobi knows exactly what the people in Klintani, how that situation works. I don't know it, Theo doesn't know it, Roof doesn't know it, you don't know it, and Fruit SA doesn't know it. Only those people know it, and that is the solution to most of our problems. Is we need to get those blockages, because those blockages don't only block the commercial farmers, they block the emerging farmers, they block the family farmers.
Gunanane, you've got the last word.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can just give an input in terms of the question that you asked, whether we need a system for emerging farmers versus commercial farmers, my answer will be no. Why? Because in the international space, it doesn't matter whether you're a black farmer, small farmer, big farmer. The requirements that you need to meet are the same. However, that being said, on the background, supporting them, yes, that's where you need the differentiation, because the needs for the small farmer might not be the same as for the big farmer. But then in terms of the standard that they need to pass for international markets, for example, it's exactly the same. As I think we conclude, I think I go back to what I started with. I think as a country, we need to ask, what is it that South Africans want? And rally around that common vision, and it's what have been, I think, shared. And with that, I think we'll be able to move forward as a country. Specifically in agriculture, the land issue needs to be resolved. We need to resolve the issues of the market. We need to resolve the issues of capacity, both for the government capacity to support in the sector, but also for the emerging farmers to be able to produce and operate at a level which is required. Therefore, those, I think, are the key issues that we need to address and bring in the young people, the women, and all this diverse society, to be part of the agricultural sector. And in 5 years, I think we can see a thriving, competitive, representative, and equal agricultural sector.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panel. I think it was a brilliant discussion. Thank you very much for your inputs. From me, a last point, I think we underestimate how far these discussions have come. 5, 6, 7 years ago, the minute you talk about politics and land reform, it was you just don't touch that subject. Then almost, what are we going to do? What now? Then, okay, perhaps there is something. Now, where's the solution? And we've come a very long way. So the panel, thank you very much, each and every one of you. It was a great contribution. The audience, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much.
Nation in Conversation, in proud partnership with Senves, Bayer, Engine, Nedbank, Afgri, Grain SA, and John Deere, in association with Hinterland and Isuzu.